Hello. I'm back with some more Wishbone thoughts a week later than I said I would be, uh, for which I apologize if you missed me. Um, Today I'll be talking about the episodes that I watched yesterday, which were the ones based on Don Quixote de la Mancha by Cervantes and Faust by Goethe. The first one, and I don't have any props because whereas I once had two copies of Don Quixote, I now have zero. And even if I still had the one that I read, I wouldn't be holding it up for the entirety of the video because it's very, very heavy. Um, but so that one I read Faust, I think I just know because it's in the zeitgeist. Everybody knows Faust and the deal with the devil and all of that sort of thing. I don't believe I actually read it. Uh, I've seen versions of it, and uh, I believe I attended a class discussion of it in college. It wasn't my class. I was just walking around between the arts and English buildings, and a class was happening on the grassy median in between them. And it was a nice day, and it was almost the end of college, and I just sat down with them. I knew the teacher and several of the students. I just sat down with them, and I think that is where the only academic discussion of Faust that I experienced happened. But first, Don Quixote. The Wishbone title is The Impossible Dream. Paw, there spelled Paw, after the song from the musical. I have seen the musical in addition to reading the book, and I might have seen a movie, not the movie version of the musical, but I think I saw a Spanish movie, that is to say, a movie in Spanish based on the novel, which is originally in Spanish. It's complicated, and it's such a long novel, such a big story. The musical takes certain liberties, but I'm just talking about Wishbone. And so the Impossible Dream from the musical, in which Don Quixote sings of the virtues of trying to achieve something that's impossible to achieve, and the real life um, parallel to Don Quixote tilting at windmills, so to speak, and literally, is Joe wants to beat the consecutive free throws 16 and below record. So he's 16 and below. He wants to score in under 5 minutes more than, I guess, 80, 84, I think is the record, and he wants to break that record and make it into the world records. No children should be trying to break world records, but the society that we live in encourages and promotes that sort of idea, and I suppose they occasionally do, but what's the point? Um, so that's the parallel. Don Quixote wants to be a knight of that type of person that has gone out of fashion. Joe wants to score the right number of free throws. Um, so the Don Quixote, the book, is very long, rather boring, very repetitive, and kind of bitter and sardonic. There's a little bit of sweetness, but it's mostly bitter and sardonic. And the Wishbone version, of course, is not. It's cute. And Wishbone, as Sancho Panza, the squire, is much more likable and agreeable and than the character in the book, as he would have to be. So it's a cutesified version of the story, as all of these adaptations are, but particularly notable here, for me at least. And it is mostly Don Quixote and Sancho going about their thing in the Wishbone version, which is the best part of the novel. For me, the best part was just their banter back and forth, often insulting each other, but never abandoning each other. And so I think what they were going for was encouraging that kind of friendship and encouragement, but still bringing, keeping your friends from going overboard. Like there's a part where uh, Don Quixote is bragging about going after giants, and Wishbone, as Sancho, just keeps going, they were windmills. No, they were windmills, and they just keep going back and forth. And that's the spirit of their relationship that I liked in the book. For Joe, um, he practices, and he's coached by David and Sam, and they are encouraging. And there's another character whose name I did not get, who helps him with rebounds during his practice sessions. And then, of course, his big rival Demont comes in and says, "I'm going to go for the record too," and Joe gets distracted and starts. And he was already kind of thinking, "Well, this is a big endeavor. How am I going to do it?" And now he's got his main rival is going to do as well, and so that adds to the pressure. And on top of this, Wanda is doing a story about him pursuing this record for the Oakdale newspaper, and she's being her usual goofy self, which is not helpful to him. So there is a scene in which he seems very discouraged and nervous, and they never really show how. Like in the past, there have been episodes where David's discouraged and Sam's discouraged, and they kind of show their process to getting out of the like you see Sam have a conversation with, I think, Wanda and Ellen when she's going to do the soccer game, and you can understand how she's had her talk. Joe, it kind of like leaves him discouraged, and then goes straight to the competition, and the judges are there, and they say who wants to go first, and Demont just kind of leaps up, and Joe's like, yeah, okay, cool, you go first. And you don't really see how he started to feel better. You can kind of assume that he did, but it felt like there was a missing scene there. And then Don Quixote, of course, they skip forward a lot because it's in a 900 plus page book and a 25-minute episode of television, and so but they hit all the important marks, and they kind of he has one joust, he wins, and then a couple of scenes later, the scene in between is the Joe World scene. He has another joust and he loses, and that's the end of the story. So it hits all the important beats, and it does a little bit with Dulcinea, but she's actually a very small part of the story. So it does just the right amount of Dulcinea. It's a good episode. It is, as I've said many times, my first exposure to the story of Don Quixote. I think I remember finding it very intriguing at the time. I don't remember exactly why, but the tilting at windmills thing, and the grasping at the old ways thing, I think I found intriguing even as a small child. So that's The Impossible Dream. And then the other one was Faust, titled, the Wishbone title, Flea Bitten Bargain. So then the premise is it's a craft fair. It takes place at a craft fair. Wanda is the crafter. She's the artistic one, the eccentric one. And her boyfriend, the poetry teacher from previous episodes, is he's got to go to the James Fenimore Cooper Society. And I just wrote down that it was James Fenimore Cooper Society because I read The Last of the Mohicans and didn't really like it. And I just found it. But of course, societies exist for all of these people. But I just found it funny that it was that one. And I was wondering if that was a joke about him, or if it was somebody on the writing staff actually belongs to such a society. I'm not a fan of James Fenimore Cooper. So I found it funny. And so Wanda enlists Joe to help her at the craft fair. And Joe brings Wishbone, because of course he does, even though bringing a dog to a craft fair doesn't seem like a good idea, but as he says, he didn't know he wasn't supposed to bring Wishbone. And the neighbor at the craft fair, Wanda's, the next table over, is a guy who's selling a thing called a Wishomatic, which seems to be a VR thing, kind of like, well, I don't know because I'm not interested, but there's been a lot of commercials on other YouTube things, videos for something that you put on over your eyes, and it's a big white thing, and it's a VR, and it's got a name. I don't remember it because I'm not interested in it, but I was just wondering if that was a craft. It didn't seem like it was an invention, but was it a craft? I didn't think it belonged at the thing, and neither did Wanda. And it intrigues Joe, who tries it out, and apparently he tries it out, and he's a pro basketball player in his VR. And I don't know, like today's VR could probably load, just have stored thousands of scenarios, and they'd be well crafted. But back then, technology, again, I think Wishbone, just its technology stuff is more fantasy, which is fine for storytelling, but it looks somewhat ridiculous from the now perspective. And I just imagined Joe's in there. He mimes dribbling while he's wearing this thing, and because he's pretending he's experiencing being a pro basketball player. And I just pictured that the ball was a cube, and that it went very slowly up and down, and that whenever Joe turned, it was happening very slowly on the screen, that he was seeing. But I don't know. I wasn't there. But that's just what I imagined based on what I remember of video games, the back then. So let's see. And again, this is not one that I've read, so I'm Faust. I don't know it as well as other things. I think this is the first. Well, no, the African American folk tales I didn't know. Anansi I didn't know. So I'm just going on what was presented. And Wishbone plays Faust, and then there's a guy who plays the devil, and you just see the devil makes this bargain: I'll give you whatever you want, and it's Faust is the classic "be careful what you wish for," and I didn't get a clear sense of why Faust was so unsatisfied, but he was, and he sells his soul to the devil to get everything he wants. And there was a great line. The devil says, "You must sign in blood," and then it shows just close up on Wishbone going, "Ew," which is a great way of just depicting that for kids, like being honest about what the story is, and then depicting it for kids. I think in Tom Sawyer, they become blood brothers or something. One of the Wishbone stories, I'm pretty sure they become blood brothers, but they don't depict becoming blood brothers because Wishbone was being made as AIDS was really gaining traction in the public consciousness, and so swapping blood was not something that was encouraged, as apparently it was in the 80s, 70s, and when Tom Sawyer was written. So I just love that element of we're going to do it like it's done in the story, but we're going to make it clear to the kids this is disgusting and they shouldn't do it. It was some of the best acting from the dog because the voice was so perfect. So let's see. Wanda sells her wilderness figurines. So Wanda makes wilderness figurines. She's a really interesting character. And the guy selling the Wishmatic, his name is Dr. Montana, I think. Wishbone at one point refers to him as Dr. Nevada, mocking him in such a way that, of course, he doesn't understand because he can't hear Wishbone's thought speak. And while Joe is distracted, and Wishbone... now, I suppose this is a realistic... because we know that Wishbone is smarter than your average dog, and Wishbone doesn't like that Joe is being seduced by this machine, but an actual dog responding the way Wishbone did, I suppose it kind of makes sense, because Joe puts the giant helmet on and his face disappears, and now Wishbone, the dog, who doesn't necessarily have object permanence, I don't know much about dogs, is alone. He doesn't have Wanda, who he knows. He doesn't have Joe, who he knows. He just has this faceless thing that used to be Joe, and he starts barking. And so I guess that's makes sense as a reaction for a dog. I'm not positive, but that's how I justify it in my mind. And in Wishbone's panic, he knocks over the money jar that Wanda was keeping her money in, and Wanda gets back, and Wanda doesn't freak out about this. She doesn't punish Wishbone or anything, or Joe. She just says, "Oh, Joe, would you go and get the other jar?" So I thought that was very good of Wanda, but she was very happy she had just sold a bunch of her wilderness figurines. So ultimately, what happens with Faust is he is, again, makes a bargain with, I guess, an angel, someone who identifies herself as Care, and she tricks him into expressing care for her, and therefore proves that he can care, and that, I guess, is enough to nullify his deal with the devil. So good for him. I look forward to one day actually reading this story, the Goethe story, or an older version. Um, it's probably one of those situations where they just used the Goethe version because it was convenient. Uh, it's kind of like using the Mark Twain version of Joan of Arc instead of just saying Joan of Arc. They can put an author there instead of saying this is an old legend. Let's see. Oh, and Joe, his kind of Faustian punishment. Faust is punished repeatedly uh, for his deal with the devil just by the devil manipulating the deal and bringing him from thing to thing to thing without him getting to enjoy anything. And so Joe, his punishment for being tempted by the promise of the Wishomatic, of any wish of his being granted right away, loses Wishbone, because when he goes to get Wanda's jar, Wishbone sneaks into her house and gets trapped in there because Joe doesn't know he's in there. And later on, Joe can't find him. Ellen, Sam, David can't find him, and they're about to call the pound when Wanda finally brings him back over because she has found him in her house. And again, it's a nice. She gets annoyed, but she doesn't. It's a nice bonding moment for the two of them. And again, she's probably happy because she sold all of her crafts. But then the Wishomatic guy comes to their house. I don't know how he knew where they lived, but for the sake of the story, he comes to their house and says, this Wishomatic is very expensive, but I will give it to you if you give me your dog. I've always wanted a dog. And very weird. Joe, of course, has no problem saying no to this, even though he wanted the Wishomatic. He doesn't seem to ever really desperately want it. Like, he comes close to telling his mom that he wants it, but it doesn't seem that he really, really wants it. And so it's very easy for him to say, no, you may not take my dog. Oh yeah, I wrote down that the Wishomatic guy is the Pedro Pascal character from Wonder Woman 1984. So that's it for that. And let me just see. The next few Wishbones are Ivanhoe, which I also have not read, even though I've been told to read it multiple times, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I have. It's a large book, but I'll probably bring it along just to show it off. It's not as big as Don Quixote. I'm looking at it over there. So, thank you for watching. Eventually I'll be talking about the Wishbone episode of The Time Machine. But you can currently follow along with my reading The Time Machine into YouTube, and there will be a link to the playlist somewhere. It's a very fun book. But in the meantime, let's wag another tail.